recording, so if you wouldn't mind, we're going to mute everybody, and then at the end we'll take some questions. Because there's some that, they'd rather do this on demand than live, but glad to have all of you here. So today we're going to talk about coaching that works. And I feel like I'm an expert on this because I have tried all of the coaching that didn't work and then finally discovered, some things that did work. So let's get into it. Here's kind of our current situation. It's probably going to resonate with you. Centralized gatherings right now are just tough. I mean, whether people are intimidated about coming or if they're afraid of, COVID, or maybe they're not allowed, centralized gatherings are tough. The church is more decentralized than ever, but let's admit it, we're all small group people. This is what we wanted. We wanted the church to be decentralized and to gather into groups and make those connections. So this is kind of like the time, it's our for small group ministry, this is our heyday. But now we have to track everybody, right? Not every leader is reporting, it's always kind of spotty. If you have a great database like Church Teams, sometimes that's easier because it sends out a request to get a report, or even to find somebody other than leader that's a better report taker. But if they're not reporting, and it feels like some leaders have just kind of disappeared. And I mean, this is kind of a hard thing. I've been a pastor for 31 years now. And the hard thing that's been in this last year is you really don't know who's still with you and who's not. I mean, some of them, you've been able to communicate with, but others have kind of dropped off and you don't know who's going to be around, which is a very disappointing thing if they have dropped off. And here's the big one, and this is one I learned the hard way, is that you cannot adequately coach everyone yourself. But a lot of times what we do in order to try to coach things ourselves is we resort to training. Why do we resort to meetings? Because we learn by going to meetings. We went to college, we went to seminary, we sat in a lot of classes, went to conferences, went to workshops, even small group conferences. They sit you in a row. And we always talk about circles are better than rows. These days we're talking about circles are better than screens. But we learned through training, through meeting after meeting. And so that's kind of where we go with our people, is we want to make sure they all have the information. And our hope is that if they have the information, it's sinking in, they're applying it, they're living all of that out. When the reality is sometimes we don't know if they're paying attention, we don't know if they're hearing us, we don't know how processing the information, and we don't know how they're living it out in their groups. So why meetings often don't work? Well, scheduling is hard. People are busy. Travel time to and from a meeting. Now we've got a lot of Zoom meetings like we're doing right now. And so we don't have the travel time. Irrelevant topics. I had a pastor come up to me and he said, why can't I get my leaders to attend my meetings? And I said, well, I'll tell you why. I never met this guy before. I said, the reason people don't come to your meetings is because your meetings are boring and irrelevant. And he got offended. He said, how do you know my meetings are boring and irrelevant? You've never been to my meetings. I said, yeah, but I said, that's why people didn't come to my meetings, because they were boring and irrelevant. And so as long as you don't have a relevant topic, they're not going to show up. And you know what? They shouldn't show up. Sometimes meetings don't work because we offer the exact same training for all of our leaders. So while we don't want to go over the heads of our new leaders, we also don't want to take our experienced leaders back to kindergarten. So that doesn't work either. And the other thing I learned was people don't hate meetings. I came out of seminary thinking that, my call in life was to have meetings, and then people didn't show up and I began to question my call. But people don't like meetings. So what do? Well, meetings do not equal coaching. And so here's some things, and I've fallen into all of these traps. If you don't have a topic to discuss, don't have a meeting. If you don't have an urgent need, don't have a meeting. If your meetings are just out of habit, we have a meeting every month, we have a huddle with our leaders. Well, if it's just out of habit, don't have a meeting. Because people learn by imitation, not by instruction. People learn by imitation and not by instruction. When we're younger, we learn by instruction. When we're older, we learn by imitation. We don't fail your leaders with unnecessary meetings. They get burned out on them. So how do we train them? How do we help them if they don't want to come to meetings and, all of that? So let me tell you a little bit about me if we haven't met. My name's Alan White. I've been in group life for over 31 years. I've coached over 1,500 churches in the last 17 years, which just seems ridiculous thinking about that now. My wife and I have been married. This is our 21st year of marriage. We have 4 children between the ages of 7, 9, and 19. The oldest one graduated last year. What a year to graduate, huh? And my 3 younger ones are all doing online school at home. I work at home, so we're just at home driving each other crazy. I am an author. I do writing, I do producing, I do coaching. I blog at alanwhite.org. You probably get that in your email every week. And if you didn't, you signed up for this, so now you will. But you can unsubscribe if you don't want it. Also, most recently started a podcast called the Exponential Groups Podcast. My first guest was Dr. Warren Bird talking about the Megachurch Report. And my next episode is actually going to, I guess they say drop next week with Jay Kranda, who has been the online pastor at Saddleback Church for the last 10 years. So he has some interesting things to say about group life in podcasts. And speaking of podcaster, my friend Jay Gordon's on here. And Jay has a great podcast. It's called the Great Groups Podcast. And I think what Jay and I were talking earlier, it's mainly geared toward his leaders, but there's a lot of good stuff in there. So you want to check out the Great Groups Podcast. That was free. Jay didn't pay me to say that. All right, so let's explore this question about what is training. So what does it mean to train a leader? And so we can do training in a variety of ways. We can do some sort of centralized basic training, start all of your leaders in the same place. You cast vision for groups at your church. You give your leaders the basics of group life. I use this one. Steve Bladen put this together. Steve Bladen's been the small group pastor at Saddleback now for 20 years, and it's just called the Small Group Leadership Training Kit. And it's customizable. That's why I liked it, because I could take where he started and make it into my own. I've never developed one. I thought I should develop one and sell this myself, but I like Steve so well, just go buy Steve's. But something like this so that they all get a start. Then I got to the point where I only led 2 meetings per year because meetings were so hard. And this is where we're going to begin to get into coaching in a minute. Our first meeting we always had a big fall launch. We would do a church-wide campaign, which was our excuse to recruit more leaders. It does other things. It gets everybody in the same study and helps get people connected into groups. But the big purpose to me behind a church-wide campaign is it's the beginning of a leadership recruiting process. And that's a whole other webinar. So we're not going to get into that today. But we would do one of these every fall because our church would grow. We would need more group leaders. And this is how we recruited them. We always had food. We gave them the first look at the curriculum that we were going to use. Oftentimes we produced our own. Sometimes we purchased curriculum. Our senior pastor would be there to cast vision. And if you get your senior pastor to do the teaching on the video for the curriculum, then your senior pastor will be more motivated to help you recruit leaders. That was just free. And it really was more of a launch party than a meeting in a lot of ways. And sometimes in this meeting, we actually tapped some of our experienced leaders to help us coach new leaders. The second meeting that we had was always an annual kind of a leadership retreat. And we'd go to a beautiful place like Monterey, California, in the picture there. I would bring in a speaker, usually budget to bring in somebody, build in some downtime so the leaders, they're away, a couple hours away from their house. I live in Greenville, South Carolina now. So the last retreat we did was up at Ridgecrest up outside of Asheville. But there are places like that all over the country and all over North America. Sorry, Jen. And just somewhere it's enough of a distance where they can't just come home. We build in time to connect. What's funny to me is leaders often, even though they're all leading small groups, they don't know each other. And so it's great to share experiences. We usually had the leaders pay for their rooms, and then we would budget for some of them. And the thing that we found was that by having a weekend away, so that it was kind of set apart from the normal activity of life, was that the training would stick. And, I had leaders 6 months afterwards that could articulate. I know we're still talking about training when we're talking about coaching yet, but we're getting there. All right, you want to leverage technology. So, use Zoom or GoToMeeting. That's all we're doing now, but this is something I have advocated for a long time. And use a conference line, start maybe a training on campus, move it off campus, do it at 8:30 at night. Let hopefully kids are, younger kids are getting in bed. And when I first moved here to Greenville 14 years ago now, I needed to train more coaches. And so we had 6 modules of training. We did the first module live and in person. We did the other 3 modules from 8:30 to 9 o'clock at night over a conference line. And nobody had to, go anywhere. They didn't have to drive to the church. They didn't have to arrange for childcare. We just met. And if there was a little noise in the background, we just muted it. I think we're all familiar with all of those issues now of kids popping in and interruptions and all kinds of things. But you want to leverage technology as much as you can to do your training. But again, this is not a replacement for coaching. You also want to push out training to your leaders. And so again, I'm trying to get you away from meetings is where I'm headed here. So you think about a blog. I started my blog answering my leaders' questions. Podcasts like Jay's doing, video, keep it short. And you don't have to have a lot of fancy equipment. You can record a video on your phone, upload it to YouTube, 2 minutes of video, send it out to your leaders, and then they have training right there. You can text message training. I mean, you really have to ask yourself, what is training? Use social media, and you can have a private Facebook group for your leaders, or you could have a Slack account with your leaders, anywhere where they're going to interact. And so you want to put training in front of your leaders. So I'm not saying don't train, but I'm saying back off on your training because coaching is going to be more meaningful. Offer relevant training. You have a wide variety of leaders. They have different levels of experience. They've led for different lengths of time. You can't train them all the same. Different levels of skills and experience. Generalized leader training focuses on new leaders and tends to bore the experienced leaders. Some of them will show up because they're loyal, but they're just kind of putting up with it, right? So how do you create relevant training? You ask your leaders what they need. So effective ways to ask, well, the first would be to talk to them or have coaches talk to them, find out what topics they're interested in. Or this is what I did at both of the churches I served. I would send out a survey and I would ask them, what are the top 3 issues that you're facing? You guys filled out a survey to come to this meeting. And one of the things I asked was, what do you want to learn about? And if we don't cover it here, we can cover it another time, but hopefully we'll cover it here. But ask your leaders what they need to know about, what problems they're facing in their group, what concerns that they have, and then use these different formats to give them the answers: blog, podcast, video, text message, social media. This is my friend Micah Oder. He's great at making these little training videos. 2 minutes max. Use your smartphone. Ask your group leaders, coaches, and other staff to answer questions. So you can get some of your experienced leaders involved in this by interviewing them and getting some questions out of them. Upload them to YouTube or to social media. Again, push out the training to them. Or you can put training in their hands. I've written a couple of books. Just so you're not confused, this is actually the same book that you're looking at. The original book was Leading Healthy Groups, which is a guide for small group leaders. This started with my blog, and then I added some other content. And in the middle of last year, I realized there were no resources for online groups. So I took the Leading Healthy Groups, and in 10 days, I turned it into Leading Online Small Groups. It's about 30% new content, and everything is tailored toward online groups. And so you could put training in their hands. Years ago, before I was writing books, I would give them something like Cloud and Townsend's Making Groups Work, which is a great book. It's still on the market. You might want to have their book instead of my book. I'm not offended, but actually give your leaders something. And this book I designed a little bit after Cloud and Townsend, in that I made a lot of short sections in the book. So if they have an overly talkative person, they can look in the index, go directly to that page, read a couple pages on how to deal with that, or childcare, or people not showing up, all of those issues that leaders have. All right, the best training. Now we're getting to the stuff you came for. The best training comes from the person who is the most proximate to the leader when the leader has the question. So it's good to ask leaders what issues they're facing and what they want to know. It's better if somebody is there with the answer. Now, what's interesting is the best training comes from the person who's the most proximate, not the person who's the most educated, not the person who's the most knowledgeable, not the person who's the most experienced, but the person who's available to that leader when that comes up. And here's the other part. It can't be you. It can't be you. I got about to the point where our church had about 30 groups and we got stuck. And I worked 7 years to get those 30 groups. And a big part of the getting stuck was that I was their coach for all 30 of them. And I'll be honest with you, I was doing a terrible job. And small groups wasn't my only responsibility. I had a lot of other responsibilities in my church. I had all the adult ministries, I had all the children's ministries. And for a season, I led worship. And I'll be honest with you, it wasn't a very good season. It can't be you. You have to multiply yourself. You have to multiply yourself. And we're going to talk about what that is going to look like. So the best training comes from a coach. So the coach knows the leader, because the biggest part, I blogged about this yesterday, the number one factor in coaching is relationship. It's not creating a bureaucracy. It's not administrative tasks. The number one thing about coaching is it's built on a relationship. So the coach gets to know the leader so that when the leader has a question, when the leader has a problem, they're going to pick up their phone and they're going to call their friend who can help them with their problem. Because otherwise what it feels like is if the coach is more administrative or assigned and there's not a lot of relationship, then when you really have a big problem, you call and it's like you're getting called into the principal's office, right? Whereas if you have a friend who's a coach who's checking in on a regular basis and you've built this relationship, then when the problem is still small, the leader could say, hey, let me run something by you. What would you do in this situation? Before it blows up into a big thing. Coach is available to a leader. Now, not every coach is available to 25 leaders, and that's okay. Some coaches I found have been brilliant with 3. They're a disaster if they have 4. So keep them at 3. That's fine. The coach shares their experience. So yes, we're going to train coaches, and yes, we're going to build a relationship with the coaches we have, but the coach is going to share from their experience. And they may have a lot of experience. They may have just a little bit of experience, but it's kind of like back when I taught at a Bible Institute, I was a little nervous about, getting a grasp of this curriculum that I was going to teach, even though I had, went to Bible college, went to seminary. And I asked one of the seasoned instructors at this Bible Institute, I said, what's the secret? He says, well, the key is you stay one lesson ahead of the class. Just one lesson ahead. That's all we needed. We didn't have to be a semester ahead. It'd be one lesson ahead. So as long as the coach knows a little more than the leader, they're going to do a good job coaching. The lesson is going to stick better. So it's a teachable moment. So a leader has a question, a leader has a problem. The coach gives them some insight on this is how you might handle it. And then that lesson's going to stick. I mean, think about it. When are you going to worry about having an overly talkative person in your group? When you have an overly talkative person in your group, right? So again, you want to keep that as close as you can. But coaching is hard. But not unless you don't make it hard, okay? So some pastors think groups are hard, but you don't think groups are hard, or else you wouldn't be here, right? Okay, so coaching is a matter of scale. This is Lyft. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a Lyft. We're not talking about Uber, we're talking about Lyft. 6 years ago, Lyft had 30 employees. Today, Lyft is a $24.3 billion company. I just checked it on Google today. Scale equals growth. So coaching is a matter of scale. So scaling is not new. In fact, this goes back to Exodus 18, that Moses was leading the people of Israel, which is estimated at the time, Israel was between 3 and 3.5 million people. You can debate me on that, but it was a lot of people. Problems? Well, Moses' family left him. We see in Exodus 18, verses 2 through 6. They went to live with Jethro, his father-in-law. Moses solved all of Israel's problems, all of Israel's problems. And Jethro said, what you are doing is not good. So Moses' excuses, number one, I'm the only one who can do it. He's the one that had the knowledge. He's the one that had the link to God. I'm the only one that could do it. And the second thing is, the people like coming to me. Moses needed to be needed, right? So insights. First of all, if you can do it, then you can train others to do it. Sometimes we feel like, well, I'm responsible. I'm the pastor. I'm the director. I need to deal with these kinds of issues. I wouldn't want to make a volunteer deal with these sorts of issues. But the thing is, if you can do it, you can train somebody else to do it. And if you need people to come to you, you might be codependent on your ministry, which is not a great place to be. All right, so Jethro's advice to Moses was this. You have leaders of tens, you have leaders of 50s and hundreds, and you have leaders of thousands. And then the big issues only came to Moses. So using this analogy, your leaders of tens would be your group leaders. Your leaders of 50s and hundreds would be your coaches. Now, if you only have hundreds, then your coaches would be your small group team. If you have thousands, then your leaders of thousands would be directors or community leaders, whatever title you want to use. That would be your small group team. And then your team would have coaches, the coaches would have leaders. And I've served churches in both of those formats. So what Jethro is outlining to Moses, brace yourself here, was the original pyramid scheme. But anyway, so you have leaders of tens, leaders of 50s and hundreds, leaders of thousands. And this model works well for small groups and will help you to scale your ministry. Scaling will better serve your group leaders because every group leader is going to have someone who is available to them to support them, to encourage them, to answer their questions. Now, granted, every group leader doesn't need the same amount of support or instruction. If they're new, they need more. If they've been around for a while, you may only need to meet with them, 4 times a year or something. Scaling will honor and empower your best leaders. So you have leaders that have experience. You have leaders that have ability that would do great at this. I had leaders that did great at this. And the biggest obstacle to them doing great at coaching was that they had the small group pastor named Alan White that kept getting in their way and doing everything for them. And once I learned to get out of their way and allow them to not just have the task of ministry, but to have the authority, they did a great job. Scaling will make your job easier because every little issue that comes up, the issues, the common problems that most new leaders have, an experienced leader can answer. And so similar to Jethro's advice to Moses, that when the big issues come up, those are the only issues that you're going to hear about. The rest of the stuff can be resolved and you don't really need to be involved in that. And it's tempting to think at this point, well, if leaders call me, if they email me, if they hit me up on Facebook or, stop me in the lobby at church or whatever, it's fine, I can answer their questions. But the question you have to ask yourself is this. When your small group ministry is 4 times as big as it is right now, how are you going to handle that? And so the decisions that you make now, the coaching structure that you begin to build now will make all of the difference when your small group ministry quadruples. I can also go to the negative. If the coaching structure you have now persists and you don't scale your ministry, then you will definitely limit the size of your small group ministry. And I was guilty of this. John Maxwell talks about the law of the lid, that an organization can only grow to the point of the leader's ability. And so part of the reason our groups were limited, I could complain about my senior pastor didn't promote groups enough. My leaders weren't willing to develop an apprentice and split their groups. I could complain about all of those things, and I have. But the bottom line was, until I developed my own leadership ability and allowed other leaders to come with me and help me, I was limiting the size of our ministry. So both ways. You don't want to be the limit. You don't want to be the lid, but you also want to be prepared when your small groups multiply. And so scaling will grow your groups ministry. And our ministry, after 7 years, we doubled in a day, and 6 months later, we doubled again. And we had to have coaches in place. And some of that we did in a hurry. Some of that was a bit of a mess. But then the second church I served was a church of about 6,500. In our first series, we went from 120 groups to 600 groups in one series. And then it shook out to about 400. But having the coaching structure in place allowed us to keep far more of those groups than we might have otherwise. So if you cannot scale, you become the bottleneck. Hi, my name's Alan. I was a bottleneck. I admit it. Your group leaders are not going to be served well. Your life is going to be more difficult because all of the problems are going to come to you. Your ministry is going to be limited, and you probably need to serve a smaller church. So if you want to manage what you're doing now as if you're in a small church, you'd be better off just being in a smaller church, because then it would be more manageable. But nobody wants to give up their job. Everybody loves their church. So we're not going that way. So let's talk about the essence of coaching. Experienced leaders share their experience with new leaders, just like we share our experience with everybody else. Adults learn by imitation, not by instruction. So if the leader's issue is outside of the coach's experience, then they're going to call on your experience. Moses, you're Moses in this analogy. So some first steps to coaching. Number one, give everyone a promotion. Experienced leaders become coaches, right? Group members become leaders. That works. Start simple. You don't need to make this complex. You don't need to fill out an entire org chart and have every single one of your leaders assigned to a coach right out the gate. I've seen some beautiful org charts in my day that were not working at all, but they sure did look nice. So think about, which leaders are going to need the most help. Well, your new leaders are going to need the most help. And your experienced leaders, if you haven't been coaching them that well, I used to beat myself up about that. But the reality was, I realized one day that, I think it was the day that our groups doubled, was that even though I hadn't coached them very well, they had figured it out. And so out of their experience, I matched them up with all of these new leaders, and they were able to help the new leaders along. So don't feel bad about the coaching that you're not doing. Thank the Lord that you have experienced leaders that are a wonderful pool of potential candidates to be coaches. Start with your new leaders only. So you launch a series, you're going to launch after Easter, maybe you're going to launch this fall. Don't worry about coaching every single one of your leaders. Some of them just, you've been coaching them by benign neglect and it's worked out okay enough, but focus on the new ones. Change your focus. See, instead of recruiting leaders and connecting people into groups, you want to put your effort into coaching and training. So how do you get more groups? Well, you ask your senior pastor to recruit the leaders. So maybe you do an alignment series, a church-wide campaign. Like I mentioned earlier, you get your pastor to do the curriculum. I have not recruited a small group leader since 2004. I have not recruited one. And yet, the first church that I served, we went from 30% in groups to over 125% in groups. The second church I served, we went from 120 groups to 400 groups that stuck. I didn't recruit any of those leaders because my senior pastor recruited all of them. And there are a lot of good, in fact, on my website, I'll send you a link to this. I have, it's called the Senior Pastor's Guide to Groups. And it has a great, it's based on research and shows all of the benefits of having people in groups. What's even better is going back to my podcast last month with Dr. Warren Bird, This megachurch report that they do every 5 years, again, is evidence-based, research-based on all of the benefits to groups. So if you want to get your pastor excited about groups, you might mention that what Dr. Bird found was people that are in groups give 11% more than people who are not in groups. That'll get him excited. So I'll send you a link to both of those things. You can download the report from ECFA, but I'll send you the link to that as well. But they're worthwhile looking at. So you can show your pastor, here are the benefit of groups. And there's something in there that your pastor is going to get excited about, whether it's evangelism or serving or outreach or whatever else. There is a connection to small groups. So ask your pastor to recruit the leaders, then ask the leaders to recruit the members. So if you have the pastor recruiting leaders and the leaders recruiting the members, and you put your effort into coaching and training, you will get further faster this way, doing the same amount of work that you're doing right now. But you're not begging people to lead, and you're not taking each individual person and placing them into a group that either they're not going to ever attend, or they're going to attend for short term, and then the whole thing's going to fall apart. Isn't it amazing how we can move heaven and earth to get somebody into a group, and then it doesn't work? Because that's based on relationship too, but that's another webinar. All right, how do you build a coaching structure? Number one, you can figure it out by yourself, like I did over several years. So that's one plan. Second plan is you can keep coaching them yourself, which is going to limit you and put a lid on your ministry. Third is you can convince yourself that meetings are sufficient, even though they're not, and even though, one size doesn't fit all, or I could show you. All right, so I'm going to make this easy for you. I've made all of the mistakes already. I've learned to avoid these mistakes. An effective coaching structure only takes 3 to 6 months to build. The only limitation is how fast you want to build it. So what I want to offer you is I have an online course that's called Coaching Exponential Groups. And so you have 6 sessions in this course. The first is developing your coaching structure. The second is the role of the coach. You have to define what a coach is. A lot of times I didn't know what a coach was, so I didn't know who to recruit or what I was recruiting them to. So the role of the coach, identifying recruiting coaches, training coaches, discipling coaches and leaders, and equipping coaches are the 6 sessions. You'll receive all these 6 sessions on demand. They're on video, audio, PowerPoint, and transcript. You get a complete workbook that goes with the course. You get the Exodus 18 coaching model, which is an article I've written. You get job descriptions for coaches and community leaders. Articles like Coaching One Size Doesn't Fit All. Carl George, who wrote Prepare Your Church for the Future way back when. In the small group world, I call Carl Yoda. He's a friend of mine. He lives on the other side of Greenville from me. But he developed this 3-2-1 coaching model, which is better for using it with experienced leaders. And he gave this to me, and I said, well, can I share this with people? And he said, well, share it however you see fit. So you get that too. And then there's a bonus session that talks about personality types and coaching and leaders and how you interact with different leaders. And so you look at your personality type through an assessment, and then you evaluate your leaders. And that's a bonus that goes in all of this. If you're interested, it's not expensive. It's $97 per church. So you can subscribe and then share it with everybody. You get this forever. It's never going to go away. If you register by this Friday, I'll actually add a one-on-one coaching session in addition to the course. So you can use it anytime. And so if you're interested in that, you can go over to coachingexponentialgroups.com and you can sign up. All right, so now you've had the sales pitch. We'll skip that part. And we'll go to some questions. Now, what I've given you today, you can actually take the information today, and I will send you the recording as well as the PowerPoint for this presentation. What I've given you today, you can actually take and use to build your coaching structure. But if you want more detail, if you want more information, then I would encourage you to sign up for the course. I'm going to unmute you guys, and you can unmute yourselves, actually, if you want to. And if you have any questions about coaching, I know it was kind of fire hose to face, and we ran through a lot of things but you can either turn your mic on and speak up, or you can use the chat and type the question in there. I'm more than happy to stay on for a little bit and answer any questions that you might have.
Hey, Alan, we have a model where our elders are assigned a certain number of small groups. And,
okay.
because the elders have other jobs, I'm not sure, how much coaching is able to go on. They're shepherding those groups. I wonder how a coaching model would look if it's overlaid on a model where the small group leader is having contact with multiple people to help them.
Yeah, I don't think it would be bad. I mean, because I've even seen churches where they assigned their staff to coach leaders, and the pastor says, "How do I get my staff to contact these leaders?" I said, "Well, get them all together on Friday and say, who wants a paycheck this week?" And so it was interesting, is even if you pay people to do it, they weren't necessarily doing it. Obviously, elders have a lot on their plate. It's good that they're involved. And so I think the way I would have it go almost is, especially the newer ones or the ones that are struggling, then you may want to find an experienced leader, almost like building this system under each one of the elders. So you would look at you would look at the leaders that are under the elder's responsibility and help the elder by saying, now, who out of this group of leaders has what it takes to help other leaders, and then recruit them to help maybe the ones that have less experience or the new leaders that would be under that elder's purview. Now, something that would be helpful if the elders want to engage in this would be using something like Carl's 3-2-1 coaching method, because it's only 3 or 4 meetings a year. And now, depending on how many leaders they have responsibility for, that may be daunting. But I would definitely try to see, who has experience. Look at the groups that you look at, and all of you could do this. Look at your leaders, and the ones that you say, wow, I would like to have 10 more groups just like that one. Invite them to be your coaches. The ones you look at and you say, wow, I don't want any more groups like that one, and I don't even know that I want that group. Don't invite them to coach. You don't want to multiply that. But I would look at the leaders that are under each of the elders, who has the stuff, who's doing a good job, who's supportive of the church, and then who needs some more help, and then just kind of match them up. I think
Are all of you, are the coaches you enlist, are they pretty much always people who are leading groups concurrently?
Initially, I tried to do it the other way. I looked at, Carl's Metachurch model and how they were doing coaching at Willow and places like that. What I discovered was the really good leaders that I thought would do a great job at coaching didn't want to leave their groups. And so I was in a bit of a dilemma, because I thought, how am I going to build a coaching structure if the coaches that I want, won't leave their groups to do this? And so I did a little more research, and I ended up having them coach a smaller number of leaders and continue to lead a group. And then the other thing I encouraged was that they would find a co-leader for their group, so that they could share some of the responsibility. We weren't doing the apprentice model at that point, because I kind of made a bad name out of that strategy. But I think that, kind of a couple of things come into play. I didn't want to create a bureaucracy, and I wanted the coaches to be in touch with what was going on in a group by being in a group themselves. And the other side of it was just very practical. I didn't want to lose my best small group leaders. So they just continued to do it, but then we really, it depended on the ability of the coach as far as how many people that they coach. And I had some that just had a few. I had one guy, he had 25, but he was single at the time, and we had 3 services on Sunday morning, and he was there before and after all of the services and almost connected with all of his leaders on a weekly basis. But I wouldn't recommend that everybody would have 25. I think it just depends on the person. Did that help?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions or comments, complaints? I'll take those. You can turn your mic on, you use the chat window either way.
Well, I wanted to leave a little bit of room for others, but I have another question. Other than maybe the obvious answer of just talking with a coach, what do you do with a coach who's not making contact with the leader? And I guess a follow-up question, how much is the expectation that the coach initiates most of the contact, or is the leader just made known, hey, here's the coach, call him when you need him? How does that work?
Yeah, so a couple of things there. One is that if I think the coach should initiate, and like I said before, so much of coaching is built on a relationship. So if that connection is not being made, then you have to kind of step back and look and say, what's going on with the relationships? So that would be one. The other thing is, and I didn't get into a lot of this because we did kind of an overview, but in order for coaching to succeed, coaches have to have a certain amount of accountability. So if I take, for instance, an experienced leader and I say, here's a new leader, I want you to call them once a week, answer the questions and encourage them, which is exactly what I ask experienced leaders to do with new leaders. Well, then in order for that to happen, I need to call that coach once a week and say, hey, what are you hearing from your leaders? What do you, I'm assuming they're making the calls. And if they aren't, I'll say, oh, well, you know what? I tell you what, I'll give you a couple of days to check in with them, and then I'll call you back on Friday and see how it went. And so there is a little bit of accountability there. And I don't know why, but for me, sometimes it's hard to pick up the phone and make that call because I don't want to make somebody feel bad. I don't want to put them on the spot. But, the other side of it is they agreed to do something. So I need to make sure that they're doing it. It's important. So I need to make sure that they're doing it. And number three, if I don't make them feel bad for not doing it, then I feel bad because my system's broken down.
I quoted you this morning,
advice.
Alan. Oh,
You
sorry.
did, John?
No, I was just going to say that's great advice, Alan, because that's kind of how I operated when I launched the coaching structure. Was like, I didn't want to keep nagging my coaches to see if they were calling their people. So I would, do an email and then give it some time.
Mhm.
But I think I only had 3 coaches to begin, and the groups that they were assigned to and were encouraged to build relationship with, they stopped meeting. And so I almost have to start back at square one and have to take a look at how I've been coaching the coaches,
Mhm.
or lack of, right? Because I felt like I didn't want to bother them or keep them accountable. They're busy people. They're my best leaders. And so they already said yes. And so, but I appreciate that because that's, it kind of fell apart because I wasn't exemplifying that relational aspect of what I'm hoping they were to do with their leaders.
Yeah, my friend Mark Howell says that you want to do for your coaches what you expect the coaches to do for the leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And so essentially, I mean, you're kind of your coach's coach.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing too is that if people aren't following through and maybe they forgot, maybe they got busy, all of that, well, it puts people in a place where, okay, I committed to doing this, I didn't do it. So now I feel guilty about it. I feel a little ashamed that I haven't done it. And so you can really do one of two things for a leader. One is you could say, I understand people get busy, but I really do need you to follow up because this is important. Or the other thing is, if it's just not happening, then you, at that point, have the conversation of, it doesn't really feel like this is working out the way we thought. And sometimes they're just relieved to be relieved, but then you have to find somebody to fill their spot. But and sometimes I'll start them out with a bit of a trial run. And if they prove successful, then I give them more. If they don't do it very well or don't do it at all, I thank them for fulfilling their commitment and move on. So I think, just those gentle nudges. I don't think you have to be heavy-handed. I don't think you have to be legalistic. I was working with a church in Pittsburgh a few years ago, and I mentioned coaching, and I got this reaction from the senior pastor I'd gone to college with. And I said, whoa, what's going on there? He said, well, we had coaching, and it got very just rigid and ugly, and they just had to shut it down. And so when we brought it back, we had to change the name. I don't remember if we called it mentor or guide or something, but coach was like a bad word. because of how it had gone. So, all right, John, you were saying that you quoted me. What?
I quoted you.
What did
My
you
senior
say?
pastor and I are reading Exponential Groups together.
Oh,
And I was in the office and I said, I don't know if I got this exactly right, but what is not supervised tends not to get done.
that's true. And that wasn't original with me, but yeah, that one is true. Somebody quoted me the other day and I'm like, are you sure that I wrote that? They said, it's in your book. I said, I forgot.
But my question is that, and I'm a discipleship pastor, came a year ago, right before COVID hit.
Okay.
So there's never really been someone in our church that has been in charge of groups
Mm-hmm.
or given leadership to groups. And I don't think we've ever tried coaching. So I'm the first staff person that can hopefully give time and energy and coordination to groups. And coaching is a new concept. So that gives me hope. And that's just a general statement. I don't know if I need to get going as well, but if you have anything to comment, that's great.
Yeah. How many groups do you have?
I'm sorry?
How many groups do you have?
Around 20, 30.
Okay. See, and that's kind of that place where it's like, I could do it all myself. But then if you think, okay, when this is 50, when this is 100, nope. So I think that you can, and the other piece you have to consider too is whatever the leaders agreed to when they first signed up. So out of these 25, did most of them you inherited from before, or do you have new ones that have started?
Yeah, we're studying right now, and we plan to launch something in the fall, like a campaign church-wide, and we'll plan to launch groups then, and all of that. Yeah.
So when you get to that and you anticipate having a big response, then you go back to your established leaders and you say, we are going to be inundated with new leaders. I need your help. And that is a very compelling invitation. And even if you're not doing it that way, if you're looking at, for others that are on here, if you're looking at your current small groups, you could go to your established leaders and say, I am completely overwhelmed and I don't feel like I'm caring for my leaders to the level I could. I need your help. And that statement in itself, and then you give them a little bit, you have a trial, you have a campaign, you have a trial run at leading a group, then you have a coach a trial run at coaching. I used to do it the other way. I'd take them out to dinner. I'd hand out the job description. We'd go over the job description. I'd pick up the check so they'd feel obligated, right? And then either they wouldn't do it or they had intentions of doing it and then they just felt bad and then I had to fire them and they were a volunteer and that was awkward. So I thought, forget that. I'm just going to go with, let's see how they do in action. Let's do a small trial, with a couple of new ones. And if they do well, we'll keep them. If they don't do well, then, we'll move on. But no hurt feelings that way.
Gotta go. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for being on here. All right. Any more questions? Anybody else? All right. Carrie says, Jay, that you covered her questions. So listen to Jay's podcast. The Great Groups podcast. It really is good. I listened to one, you and your co-host were interviewing one of your leaders, I think. And it was good. It was fun.
Good. Thank you.
So I liked it. I never thought about doing that with my groups. I wanted to do a newsletter and then they talked me into doing a blog. And what I realized was the IT department didn't want to have to fuss with helping me with a newsletter. So they just set me up on a blog, which when I got to South Carolina 14 years ago, nobody here even really knew what a blog was. So anyway, now we don't do blogs. Now you make little videos and put them up on YouTube and send them out to your leaders. So anyway, all right. Any other questions or thoughts before we go? We're all covered. All right. Well, take a look at the course if you're interested. It's easy to sign up. And if you have any other questions we didn't cover, you can feel free and email me just to alan@alanwhite.org. I'm always happy to answer questions. So, all right. Thank you guys. Thanks for being here.
Enjoyed it.
Much.
All right. Have a great day.
Take care.
Bye-bye.